University in 1997. His wife is a retired teacher, and their daughter is a neurology resident at the University of California, Los Angeles School of Medicine. So without any further ado, I want to introduce John. Thank you very much, John, for joining us.
No, it's a pleasure. Thank you, Nasser, with that. With that humbling introduction, let's get on with our panel. And I'm pleased to have four great superintendents here. And hour and a half seems like a long time, but if you divide it up, it's only 22 minutes each, and we have a lot to cover. So let me quickly introduce them. You have the bios with you, I believe. So you know your superintendent, I know. So Bruce Burns has been the superintendent of Moraga Elementary District since 2010, and he was a principal for years in the district. Before that, he has coached youth lacrosse, which is a favorite sport of the Festerwald household. And David Hagulan has been superintendent of Pleasanton Unified for 4 years. He was deputy superintendent of educational services, and he was the chief academic officer for the Santa Ana Unified District. And where I know from speaking with him in the past, he was one of the pioneers in the use of technology in schools. John Malloy has been, is this your second year, right, John, if I'm not, as superintendent of San Ramon Valley Unified? It's the largest district among us today with 36 schools. Before that, he was the director of education or superintendent of Toronto District School Board, and it's the eighth largest district in North America. And John Nickerson has been superintendent at Acalanes High School District for 11 years and been in the district 26 years as a teacher and administrator, and has put through two of his own children as a sign of confidence in the district through the district. And one is, I think, graduating soon. So welcome, all of you. I appreciate and joining us today. So let me just start off by reading some. I read an article in the Times this week that jumped out at me, and it was about superintendents, and it was by Dan Domenech, and he said, it's been incredibly difficult for superintendents. They're in communities where half the parents want schools open and half of them want schools shut. Wherever you decide, it's a no-win situation because you're going to have people mad at you. And so I just wanted to take stock of you gentlemen after 14 months, and that's not your only problem for sure. Logistics that you faced and the issues that have been raised already today with mental health and emotional health of your students, finding substitute teachers. I don't need to tell you all the issues, but I want to take stock. How are you doing at this point? Are you exhausted? Who wants to go first? The teacher will call. John, go first.
Well, since there's two of us that are John, three on this panel, I'll jump in.
Thank you, John.
Nickerson, you get to go next. But actually, this is my first year in the San Ramon Valley Unified School District. But I can say that when this pandemic started, I was the superintendent, director, we called it, in the Toronto schools. And no matter where you are on the globe, I can honestly say that we all, I think, pretty much experienced some pretty important realities with this whole past year. And John, I think you said it best, because I would say in the 33 years that I've been doing this important education work, in the last 17 in an assistant superintendent or superintendent role, and I want to say that I'm a former counselor by training, this has been a year where the emotions and the perspectives and the diverse opinions regarding the pandemic itself, regarding how we should be responding to it, regarding the requirements that we've been expected to follow, and who has the authority to assert those requirements. And frankly, we all care about kids, and we want to do the best for our students. And again, each and every day, I knew that the inbox would be filled with completely different views regarding what we should do. And the perspective my cabinet, working with our board of trustees, took on was this one. At times like this, we can't lead by pressure. because if we were, we would get nowhere. And so we went right to the place of what does it mean to lead with principles, PLES, so that we could at least speak as clearly as we could about the decisions that we made. And that's where obviously starting with safety and making some decisions that we would follow, for example, public health guidance rigidly, and I use that term intentionally. And then we would do our very best to listen as closely as we could to all of our stakeholders and partners, knowing that at the end of the day, there was something that brought us all together, which was the care of our kids, support of our kids, and doing the best we can for kids. But I will say that it has been a challenge like no other in my experience.
John Nickerson, go ahead. How you feeling?
So, Dr. Malloy, thank you for that. And I think we try to anchor ourselves on that principle of safety, and that's been guiding us through this. But what's made it particularly challenging, I think, John, we didn't see a 50-50. And I'm going to cite Bruce Burns sitting on this panel, the rule of thirds, which we often encounter with anything in education. A third are with you, a third are resisting, and a third are kind of in between. And that's kind of what we saw with this. A third are open the schools yesterday, a third were it's not safe, and a third were waiting to see what was happening. And I think what really complicated this, and not to anyone's fault, it's, this was a novel virus that we were learning about in the spring, developing protocol and guidance through the summer, and then through the fall that was modifying, and then some big changes in January. And so while we're trying to develop what's best for all our kids, when opinions differ, then you complicate that by, changing guidance, changing science, developing science, and then a whole lot of misinformation out there. It was really, really challenging. We're used to dealing with different opinions as we're always looking to get better as schools and bringing change initiatives. But this was particularly challenging with the changing guidance, changing rules. I know Dr. Malloy made some decisions, and literally moments later, there were changes in the CDPH guidance. And they had to figure out workarounds, and we all went through that. And so I just add that was one thing that really complicated. It wasn't just different opinions in the community. It was developing science, changing guidelines, and misinformation out there.
Thank you, John. Bruce?
I concur with both prior comments, and especially resonate with the lead by pressure comment, because that was a theme through all of this, which has been incredibly challenging, as you both, Dr. Malloy and Dr. Nickerson, described. So how am I doing? When I think about that question, I think about how am I doing today based on what's occurred over time. With kids back in school, we're seeing signs of normalcy. Some work routines are becoming a little bit more routine, which is a blessing after a tumultuous 14, 15 months. But I want to point to two things, actually three things. One is the work that we do is often isolating. And one of the positive outcomes upon reflection over the past year is working cooperatively and frequently with other superintendents. Contra Costa County superintendents met every week as a group and with our county health officers, which has been a huge support. And then beyond that, we worked even more collaboratively in smaller networks. Walla Marinda, along with Dr. Malloy, met often as well, just collaborating among ourselves. So the work that is typically more isolating was far more collaborative, which was a huge benefit to all of our districts and ultimately our kids. And the other thing I want to mention, while you're asking about our positions as superintendents upon reflection over the past year. I think we need to bring in our school boards to the discussion as well, because we work as a governance team. They went through much of what we did as well. And while our superintendent collaborative was instrumental in our well-being, and I can speak to that within our area, along with San Ramon. Our boards have also been a foundation for us to lean on, because they've gone through much of what we did as well. And I think their vision, their strength, their support to us has provided us the support in moving forward through these tumultuous times. So better today, John, than the last couple of months. I read the same article this morning, and that introduction that you read is very accurate for what we experienced this year.
Thank you. David, perhaps I'll widen it. How are you and your staff and your teachers doing at this point in the year?
Yeah, I appreciate you actually widening it that in that regard. I think, you know, just a simple answer to your question, I'm beat up. I mean, I'm tired. This has been a rough year, but that's no different of a feeling that every single one of my teachers and staff members are feeling. We have worked as hard as we know how to work to make sure that we're delivering services in a way that's the safest for both the adults and the students in the organization. So, but being tired is not a bad thing. I mean, it just means that you've been exerting a good deal of energy. And I would expect that every single one of us on this panel has got a bit of tiredness going on in us. And we've reached way beyond our areas, collective areas of expertise, I think, with regards to this novel virus that hit us. And so we've had to think in ways that we probably have never been called on to think, and to react in ways that we've never been called on to react. That's the same for our teachers. I think about each of the shifts that we've made in Pleasanton to try to deliver more services and get more students back on campus. That burden was very heavy onto the part of our teachers. And so they have delivered, they have stood up when it was time to stand up. Same thing with our classified staff. When we shut down for a week to be able to deliver technology to the homes and hotspots to the home, you know, the classified staff was working on that side while the teachers were engaged in professional development, so that when that next week arose, we were able to open back up remotely at the beginning of this mess. But none of us thought that we would be re-engaging and doing this similar work in the full school year of 2021. And so it's just been, as others have described, a series of shifts based on guidance that's totally out of our control. And it's been a challenge. There's no question about that. I will say that one of the positives that has come along in the past couple of months for Alameda County is that we've seen the counties aligned to the state guidance. I think one of the most frustrating parts for myself, and I'll even probably call John into the mix here, is our districts come very close to each other and our employees live in each other's district. And so when Contra Costa County would go in one particular direction, but Alameda would go in a different one, it introduced so much confusion into the dialogue. So I was very glad to see the county start to align and the state to take a more active role in leadership. But as others have said, I'm also really, really glad to see kids back on campus, to be able to stand on the sidelines at a football game, and just to see hope and reignition of passions in classrooms. So I'll stop with that.
Good, thanks. And one more question before, I know there's a lot to talk about what's going to happen in the summer and the next year, but before we do that, I just thought we'd take stock of what you've learned and over the past year, practices that you plan to apply moving forward, or insights that you've had. You know, Bruce, you mentioned a more cooperating, and whether you can make that part of moving ahead. And whoever wants to respond, you know, what have you learned from this experience that in fact will be useful moving ahead? Anyone who would like to respond?
I'll jump in. Certainly, as someone noted, there are far more opportunities for engagement. We've also learned the power of collaboration. Since last summer, we established a task force, which was comprised of subcommittees composed of parents, students, not students, but parents, staff, administration, classified staff, who developed amazing plans and adjusted them along the way as conditions changed. Learned that our government works very slowly. Learned a lot about state leadership, not all necessarily favorable. We've learned what we can accomplish in some regards, and as noted, very quickly under constantly changing conditions. I think we learned a lot about our own personnel in terms of the leadership within our districts being able to step up very quickly, respond, react, implement, monitor a variety of different plans or systems that we've developed. And they did so in many cases, having absolutely no break since March 2020. A number of our administrators worked throughout the summer break. And this, this speaks to their dedication. And the same can be said outside of this district as well. As noted, we learned a lot about loud voices and the impact of social media versus the work of educational experts. Panel members here, I would imagine, all have at least 30 years of experience. And that component of social media and loud voices, as Dr. Malloy mentioned earlier, leading by pressure, that was definitely out there. But there's a balance that needs to be considered in terms of lessons learned, in terms of receiving input, but also relying on elected government officials, our school board members, and our educational experts in leading. Talked a little bit about the isolation of superintendents and an outcome or lesson learned in terms of networking within our county and sometimes beyond our county, and the importance of communication. Communication changed significantly in terms of frequency. Another lesson learned in Moraga.
Anyone else like to, what you've learned, what you plan to apply?
I'll jump in with one additional component. I really agree with everything Bruce said as well. The importance of effective and precise communication is something that I've always known is important, but this last year has really helped me think deeply about that. And I'll give you a couple of examples. When there are so many different perspectives and passionate views around a situation, in this case, it was the whole concept of return to school, but we've all experienced other issues as well that are very passionate. And certainly sometimes in our seats, it is difficult to navigate. But I found that as long as I was as candid as I possibly could be, that I repeated whatever messages we were trying to share in as many mediums as I could, as I was honest when we didn't have the answer to something and simply had to wait to figure it out. And I also learned a hard lesson going back to the issue that some have already shared about we weren't in control of some of this. So to speak with too much confidence regarding what was going to come next certainly caused me and our community some challenges as well, because I didn't actually expect, for example, public health always made their decisions on Tuesdays for the following Tuesday. Okay, that's just how it was done for a long time. And then all of a sudden, one Monday in November, everything changed that day for the next. And we had communicated in a certain way, as John Nickerson mentioned just an hour before, with confidence, that having to dial that one back, when, as we have already shared, there are so many different pieces of information out there, really taught me a lesson about how to be clearer. And when I couldn't actually know what to predict, I was pretty upfront about that as well. So I'll just add that component around the importance of communication, leading to the kind of engagement that Bruce was speaking about.
John or David, don't feel like I have to. We have lots of questions. So
Yeah, no, the only thing I would add, I think, is that we have begun jumping on the communication line there with John, is that I've learned personally that probably more important than the communication from me out was opening up the channels for the communication from people in, that if we could allow them the venues to talk about the things that they're frustrated about, and that staff or parents or students, it doesn't really matter. We were able to develop our own external communications going the other direction way more effectively. And frankly, the digital forms of communication in town halls and whatnot served a great purpose in that. And so I anticipate that we will continue with that type of engagement using the digital tools way more effectively than we ever did before.
yeah, I've been told by a couple of different superintendents and districts that parent engagement has really increased this past year. I mean, certainly having parents in the living rooms working with their children and being able to attend meetings on Zoom and the like. Is that an energy that you can harness moving forward, you think?
Yeah, I do. And it's not just their willingness to log into meetings, but the level of parent engagement in providing services, engaging other parents, coaching other parents. We had one parent in our PTA who set up a method through which parents could get connected to tutors for their students that could be done remotely. We didn't do that as the district, our PTA did that. And so, just leveraging those folks and empowering everybody to, we're all on the same team, we're all in this together. So let's everybody do our best work. And so the parent engagement was not just about sharing opinions as far as I'm concerned.
So there was a Public Policy Institute of California poll that came out. I was surprised at the percentage of adults in California and public school parents as well, who are really concerned whether or not schools will be open full-time for instruction in the fall. Can you, four of you, give assurances that your districts will be open for business that way in a couple of months?
So we put out our messaging in our community that we are going to be open for in-person instruction in a schedule that looks like our 2019-2020 schedule, full instructional minutes and full programs. What we don't know is some of the restrictions that will be put on us. We are anticipating that masking, certainly indoor masking, will be required. We are not sure yet on distancing. We're planning for 3 feet of distancing, hoping that will be removed, which will take some of the pressure off our master schedule development and things like that. But we are fully planning on opening for in-person instruction. We are planning to have an option for families that want to remain on full remote, but right now the deadline to sign up for that is tomorrow. And right now we're seeing just a few families out of our 5,600 that are opting for that. So we expect virtually all of our students will be fully in person.
Yeah, if there's time before we leave, I'd love to explore that virtual option, because maybe other parents in other communities are saying, hey, this worked for me, I'd like to do it in some fashion. But for now, anyone, the others, will you be open for business as pre-pandemic in the fall?
Well, so I'll jump in there. Yes, that's absolutely our intention, and we have put kind of the same caveat that Superintendent Nickerson mentioned, that we don't have complete control over the guidance, but as long as the guidance supports that, we absolutely intend to be open 5 days a week, full days. That's what's best for kids.
And same for us. So I'll just say.
Yeah, same here. We're right now, elementary is following almost a 1920 typical day. And our middle school is back 5 days a week, a half day, and we fully intend to move forward as the others have described, with a return to 1920 schedules.
Right. So I was interested in what Wesley Smith said about the critical importance of relationship building and engagement with students now more than ever after this past year. And I'm wondering if that's a priority for your districts, and whether or not what the first 6 weeks, whether it's summer school or the fall, might look like to reflect that.
I'll jump in. I actually think it's paramount. I shared before that prior to moving into administration, I'm a school counselor, and I really feel strongly about social emotional wellness and well-being all the time, but in particular now. Some of our kids haven't been on campus for over a year. And even if we think about ourselves as adults, moving into social spaces as things have gotten better, some of us really comfortable with that, others maybe not so much. And we're all trying to kind of figure it out again, because we've sort of been in a whole different space for over a year. That's all of us. And I'm not speaking specifically about students when I say that. And our relationships have changed a bit, at least from my own experience. And so some of our students who have been back on campus now have shared with us that they're tentative, that they've got all kinds of experiences that they may want to share. Some of them aren't interested in sharing it, but they're feeling all kinds of things. And yet we still want to keep those learning conditions that help our kids excel, because that's what, all of our districts are also known for. So we've already started the conversation. We are collaborating with our parents. We are collaborating with our staff and our union leadership to say, we got to balance this. And balancing it means being intentional. Naming that, for example, the first days of summer school, where some of our kids will be back for the first time, have to reflect what we were doing a couple of weeks ago when our kids, some of them were coming back for the first time. And then, of course, because we're expecting just about everybody in August, let's take some days to really think through, what does it mean to reconnect? What does it mean to provide those learning opportunities that promote that sense of belonging? How do we shift focus so that if we jump right into business as usual, if there are any kids in the community, which I'm sure there are, that need something different, that we don't miss that? And so we're in the process of thinking through that, collaborating about that, thinking about our professional learning sessions for our staff so that we incorporate these key social emotional pieces. And it is a priority from our perspective.
Others comment on that? How will you know on an individual basis where each student is at this point when they come back, both from a mental health standpoint and academically? How do you do that? Because I'm sure districts are no different from others that we've been reading about. There will be a huge difference, disparities among the students in terms of the experience that they've had this past year, then coming back. Anyone?
I'll share. The academic piece and kind of gaps in learning in the last year, in some respects, that's the easier to assess. And we have a lot of tools in place, and we'll be developing new tools to really try to understand if there are critical gaps that will prevent students from moving forward. On the social emotional front, that's a little trickier, and we plan on doing activities in our summer school as well, and in our kind of we're doing a bridge program, kind of an orientation for 9th and 10th graders. And then we'll do things during the school year to help the professionals assess where kids are, and if there are signals being given out by students that indicate more intensive work or more direct work with students to help their adjustment back into school. Particularly, all of our kids have been through trauma, how they respond to that, a year of a pandemic, a year plus of a pandemic, that is trauma on any adolescent, any young kid. How they respond to that, it's going to be very different. And so trying to understand that through kind of informal activities, SEL, instruction, circles, things of that nature will help us determine who needs more intensive and direct services.
I'm interested in, particularly with regard to kindergartens. I'm assuming that your district's the enrollment dropped for kindergartners, and how are you going to deal with that when presumably they will be returning, but perhaps in first grade or perhaps in kindergarten again? If you're in first grade, how do you deal with the differences? How do you prepare them for coming back? And then once they're there with first graders and the like, it will be a challenge, I'm assuming.
Yeah, definitely it will be a challenge. I think that kind of building on what Superintendent Nickerson said, there's got to be pre-school, not preschool, but pre-opening of school activities that directly engage not just the students at that age, but also the families at that age. And so as we develop our plans related to the extended learning opportunity grants that are available to us, we have allotted a good deal of energy, and hopefully the funding will follow that, towards SEL re-engagement activities, summer enrichment activities that are not necessarily academically focused, but really geared at trying to reconnect kids to each other and to their school site. And so I'm hopeful that our hard work during the summer and as we ramp up to the beginning of school in August, we'll be able to not just deliver services, but really do some multiple levels of assessment with those students coming back.
And just to be clear, David, are we talking just kindergarten or all students in summer school?
Oh, it's for all students.
Okay.
We're going to pay particular attention to the kinders and first graders, but also at the middle school level, the sixth graders, the high school, the ninth graders, because those people have never really, up until the past few weeks, been on their campus, and some of them will have not ever been on their campus before. And so it's, you know, as John said, we just have to be thinking differently about the roll up to school. And we need to pull back a little bit on the pressure that we normally do to engage in the learning processes, and really focus on the engagement and connection processes first, because, you know, it's the relationships that teachers build with students that facilitate the learning. I think we all know that. It's also true about the parents. It's the relationships that the parents are able to build with the school site that help support the child in learning outside of the classroom. And so there's a lot of reconnecting that needs to go on. And that will be a key focus in the coming months for us.
Yeah, I'll just share that, you know, we've heard about the importance of safety and connectedness. Those absolutely have to be the focus and are necessary components for students prior to them learning. So there needs to remain a focus on that. And we are also looking at increasing counseling and psychological services, as well as providing professional development for our teachers so that they're more aware of potential mental health issues. I'll add, having just visited Catalina and Emery in a kindergarten class at one of our schools the other day, learned that the increased number of students returning to school is selling itself and sending messages to parents who may have some hesitation in sending their kids to school, that school is safe, that they are making connections, and learning is part of the instructional day as well. To that point, we're seeing as many as 95% of our students back in school, which is a different set of numbers relative to where we started mid-February, with about 70% of our students in school. So slowly but surely, the conditions we are in now are sending messages to parents and others that we can do this safely. And of course, as all the superintendents noted, with a focus on connection, making connections, and ensuring multiple layers of protection.
What's your I should ask, is there anyone else who want to respond to summer school? Is there anything that you're doing differently this summer than in the past that's worth noting at this point?
Well, in Moraga, we haven't had summer school for at least 25
Okay.
years. So we're venturing into new territory, but we're not just providing an academic component in math and English language arts, as I think some of the others noted. We are going to have counseling services with a focus on SEL, which is maybe not the kind of additional programming you might find in a pre-COVID summer school program. So that's a significant and important difference.
Yeah, I mean, I think the message from many people is don't go back to a traditional summer school after having gone through this experience over the past year. So what are your priorities for the next year? And we'll get to spending in a minute, but sort of what's your North Star for the next year in terms of making up for the disparities of learning that you'll find and well, the like, as you envision the next year, how might it be different?
I'll jump in on that because it connects, I think, to the conversation that just happened as well, that whenever there are challenges like we faced, looking for the opportunities around what could be better going forward is something I think is really important for us to consider. And, for decades, we've talked about personalizing learning and ensuring that we are connecting learning to students' interests, strengths, passions, as well as their needs. And we sometimes focus, I think, so much on student need, which I don't want to ignore, that we might miss kind of how we connect with our kids in such a way that they are really engaged at that level. So we talked about personalized learning, we understand what it is, but then when we look more deeply at where it's happening and how it's happening, I think that we have found that that's not always the case. So being really specific. We love that our educators do amazing work with our students. We appreciate that the standards and expectations are high, and we're grateful that our kids, for the most part, do so very well. But when we talk about the love of learning, when we talk about the curiosity of learning, the engagement of learning, when we do different surveys and such, we don't get the same response. Similarly, taking it to the next level, we ask our kids if they feel like they've got a caring adult in the community, someone that they can turn to. We don't always hear that. Do they think their teachers and their staff care about them? Yes. Do they think that the staff have high expectations for their success? Yes. We look at the social emotional pieces in the data we have collected even prior to the pandemic. We don't always see the level of connection, that level of engagement, that level of love of learning, along with the high expectations and standards that I think are really important going forward. So I think this is going to be a catalyst for us to say we can't do it as we used to do it. We all get why. There's no need to ignore what's gone on. And so let's be really intentional about it. Let's figure out what it looks like, sounds like, and let's embed it in our professional learning. Let's support it through counseling services and social work in particular. And then let's monitor it over the next year to see, so what's changed, what impact has it had, and how might it continue to inform us moving forward? So just a few thoughts from my perspective on that.
Thank you. Others? So one of the things that I've heard, a couple of things that I've heard stressed several times would be tutoring as for example, high intensity tutoring as one option that a lot of folks, a lot of professional educators, professors are advocating as a strategy moving ahead. Another one is building partnerships with nonprofits so that you can extend the day, even if you're not doing it now. What do you think about tutoring in particular? Is that on your horizon? Okay.
So John, I'll jump in there, I guess. I think that there are a lot of families who are looking for tutoring support for their students, and so it certainly will be something that we advocate for within our plan moving forward. The trick for me is that really I'm concerned about, and it relates to tutoring, so I'm not going down a rabbit hole, trust me, but I'm concerned about trying to build back the confidence in the community. Because I think this year has shaken everybody to their core. I know it shook me, and I know it's shaken our teachers because they've had to try things they've never been asked to do before. And parents were put in the position of having to be teachers at home, and they've never had to do that before. And so I really want to focus on rebuilding the confidence and connectedness within the community. And I think tutoring is one step to help build a student's confidence back. Professional development is one step for upbuilding a teacher's confidence related to the things they've gone through this year. Parenting programs are one step in building back the confidence of the parent community. So I'm thinking about it less about tutoring and more about connectedness and confidence building.
And John, I'll add, I want to echo what David's saying. I think that's absolutely true, but a little different angle on the tutoring piece. We will have some tutoring programs that we'll be offering for students outside of the school day. But what we found in the past when we've done that is the students who tend to take advantage of that are not the students that we're most concerned about. They're the students that are at that B+ and really want to get up to the A-. And while we support that 100%, we're concerned about a different set of group of students. So one of the things that we have an academy structure within our school day. So it's within the school day, and we just need to get better about really targeting the students in that academy so that they're getting the extra support. And the other piece, even more so, is the professional development of our teachers so that they can use their class time for interventions and kind of those tier 1 in the class interventions to support the students with the learning gaps. And that's a challenging thing to do when you've got 30 kids in your classroom. How do you individualize it? But it can be done. It is done. And we just need to work to build our teachers' capacity so they're more equipped to do so that learning loss is being addressed in the classroom, perhaps in academy, but we're not depending on students to show up after school, before school, in the evenings for tutoring to fill that gap.
Yeah, I know there's talk about perhaps tapping into retired teachers who perhaps can do this as in that role. Is that a possibility for that you're considering? Yeah. So a month from now, districts are supposed to do something called the Extended Learning Opportunity Grant Template. It's a mouthful. What it says is how you're going to spend the $4.6 billion that the state has allocated in one-time money, actually available over several years. And I know that's part of $35 billion that coming to the state. And before you jump up and say, that's not us, it's true. And I think people need to realize that, and we at EdSource certainly throw around that figure, but it is largely based on poverty and English learners. So that, and I looked at your, I looked at how much we ran a database which gave how per student in each district, and it's in the hundreds for all of the districts, and that's a reflection of the low percentage of poverty and low income students. Most of this money will be allocated based on Title I and the local control funding formula, which is weighted towards low income students and English learners and homeless kids and foster kids. So it's not going to be $5,000 per student, which is a statewide average, and it's not going to be $11,000 per student, which is what LA Unified expects to get. But there is money, and I'm wondering how you plan to use it.
John, this is Bruce. First, thank you for that important recognition.
I figured if I didn't, you would. So yeah.
Appreciate the homework. There are some disparities out there. I want to segue from your prior question about tutoring and answer the question. Yes, we are looking to our retired folks. And part of the Expanded Learning Opportunity Grant is looking at existing successful programs. This is what we're doing right now. While engaging our employees and our parents, which is part of the ELO Expanded Learning Opportunity Grant, for their input as well. So we're looking at our existing research-based effective tutoring programs and looking for opportunities to expand them. So that is an example of some programming that we're looking to implement via ELO, including the summer school program I talked about, additional counseling services, psych services, mental health training for staff. And I just want to concur with the prior comments that part of this as well is building capacity through professional development of our general ed or classroom teachers, so they have more tools in their toolbox to meet the needs of students.
So, superintendents, how do you plan to spend the grant that you're supposed to say by June 1st? And Well, I won't be mean. It's kind of a trick question because that's supposed to be based on your contact with your community that happens between now and June 1st. But and I don't know whether it's happening yet, but how do you plan to reach out to your community and discuss what the priority should be? And at this point, what would you expect your priorities for using this money and the larger federal money, if any of it's coming to you over the next number of years?
So I can jump in. Okay, go ahead, Dave.
No, go ahead, John. I'll go after you.
So we're in the throes of this right now. We are collaborating with our union colleagues. We are reaching out to our staff, students, and our parents through some logical means to get their insights and perspectives. And we're getting really good insights into where we should focus. So there's great ideas. And the good news is they're pretty aligned too. So I'll speak about that really quickly in a minute, but I think, John, you did set this up properly, that from my seat, and are going to do bringing some of this information into our boardroom with our trustees next week. But my biggest concern is the dollars aren't necessarily as large in our communities as people might assume without looking at it. And because numbers are being thrown around, the expectations are immense. And then the other concern we always deal with, because in my experience, especially when we're trying to reconnect after a year like this one, yes, we do need the professional focus, and we will. And yes, we might need some resources, and we can purchase them. But what we really need are people. We need professionals, educators, counselors, things of that nature. And yet, because of the nature of the dollars, we also don't want to raise the expectations so high and then not be able to sustain that staffing level a year or two down the road. So that's another piece that we're trying to be really upfront about, because the truth is, I feel strongly that we need to hire additional staff to assist us with the learning issues, with the wellness issues, and that's what I'm going to be bringing forward. And I've been saying that publicly wherever I go. But there are concerns about it too, as I've mentioned. So Dave, over to you. Those are a few thoughts from San Ramon.
Yeah, I would concur with your statement about needing staff and the difficulty that the one-time nature of the dollars presents to that mechanism, because we can make all kinds of promises and deliver all kinds of supports. And then in a year and a half, we're pulling those supports back because there's no funding to support them. So it's tough. And we've been engaging our stakeholder groups, various stakeholder groups in various town hall sessions related to the grant opportunities and how we should prioritize those funds in the kind of the 7 buckets that were presented in the template. And so our parents have had an opportunity to weigh in. Our PTA leaders have all had an opportunity to weigh in separately. We've had high school students, middle school students weighing in. We've had our classified staff members weighing in, and our leadership teams weighing in, and they're all writing into a common template so they can see the ideas that are being placed by other people. And we are taking a summary of those requests, so to speak, or ideas to the board on the 6th for their first review of it. And that will be their opportunity to give input. So we're deep into that process, and it's resulting in a lot of common thought around the issues. So I'm pleased about that part.
Yeah, and the common thought, how would you sum that up?
Well, student supports, mental health, support for teachers, and staff, including mental health focus for the teachers, increased staffing, so counselors, social workers, and the extended learning opportunities available to help kids kind of get back to where they need to be, and get reconnected to the schools. I would say those are kind of the big bucket items.
Yeah. John, do you have priorities for that money? John Nickerson.
Yeah, so we're in the midst of a process and on this, but some of the areas that we see it going, a lot into professional development and just the demands through teachers on special assignment that will be leading as teacher leaders, making our wellness centers at each of our campuses a little bit more robust with some additional staffing and having them more active during the summer, bringing in additional paraprofessionals. As you know, 10% of these dollars need to be spent on paraprofessionals. And we think having additional adults with some training can really benefit our students. We are expanding our summer school significantly and rethinking our summer school, which we talked a little bit about before. And so some dollars will likely go there. Class size reduction, and that's kind of hitting two issues. One, allowing us to build a full master schedule with the 3 feet separation, but also we believe a slightly smaller classroom community will help teachers better connect with students better connect with each other, and make kind of individualized instruction and intervention a little bit more feasible for our teachers. So those are some of the big buckets that we're looking at.
Yeah, I guess extending the school year, extending the school day, weekends, that's all option. I mean, summer school as well is part of it. Anyone, I mean, LA got a lot of headlines for saying we're going to extend the school year to 2 weeks, part of which was a teacher training. But anyone thinking about adding days in any fashion during the next year or two?
That has not come up as an interest with our folks.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'll just add that I think it's also important to note that depending upon how people have experienced this year, summer school may not be the answer for everyone. They might just need space. Kids might just need time to step back. Families might need some time to re-engage differently. Some kids do need to be there, and we're going to be there for them. But the whole notion of the extra time and the extra days, all of that takes, if we look at, the evidence around tutoring, the evidence around extensions of time and space, that all takes some pretty deliberate planning, and it takes some pretty deliberate steps forward that, I'm going to put it out there. I think, David, you said it at the beginning. We've only got so much brain space at this moment, and that's not an excuse. We've only got so much energy at this time, and we want to think as creatively as we can. We want to lean in as far as we can, but we also need to say to our staff, you got to disconnect a little bit. We want to say to our families, we're going to be there for you this summer for those of you who need it. But some of you, if you don't need to be there because you want to do something different for you to rejuvenate and renew, please do it. And let's come back together in August for those who don't choose the summer option in a way that allows us to really, not be business as usual, but still hold the high standards. We kind of figure all that out together. That's my goal in San Ramon, is to just figure out how do we keep bringing our parents and our students and our staff around tables, whether they be virtual or certainly, hopefully soon, physical presence tables, and just keep doing this work collaboratively. That's just some thoughts in relationship to this whole notion of strategies we might use in the short term.
Yeah, thanks, John. I think that that's really important to say in terms of meeting people's needs and their need for time off. And I've heard that. I mean, I'm sure all of you feel the urgency, but just more is not necessarily better at this point. Yeah, John, I'm particularly interested in your experience in Toronto, how it might inform this. And the reason is, we know there's not much of a state support system in California. You're not going to turn to the state and expect to get answers particularly, and you're not necessarily, we don't have a system set up of county help. And that's why I was interested to hear Bruce and others talk among yourselves. But I'm just interested, John, if since Toronto as a province was recognized as one of the best systems in the world, if a pandemic, or maybe you know what's going on in Toronto, if this had been a pandemic here, what would the response have been from a provincial that we're not getting from a state? And how is it that the state of California or the counties or whatever, can we create a system so that when you're looking at, for example, Bruce was mentioning tutoring, that you know where the best practices are, and you don't have to reinvent everything on your own, despite the much heralded local control. You don't have to go through that process. There's some help you can turn to. And I'm interested in anyone's response, but particularly the Toronto experience, John.
Most certainly, I'll offer an insight that I think the impacts of the pandemic have had really similar reactions and experiences for the communities in Ontario and in Toronto in particular. And unfortunately, Ontario and Toronto right now are in a pretty rough spot. I do speak with my colleagues there regularly, and they're back in another spike. So unfortunately, everything is quite closed down again, and nothing is open and such. And unfortunately, they're in that extreme spot we were in January. Right now speaks to something we have to kind of keep paying attention to related to this really difficult pandemic. But there is one big change, and I'm thrilled to be here in California. I made the choice to be here. I'm originally from Ohio and always planned to come back to the States. So I'm not saying this in a critical way, but what is different about the California context to the Ontario context is that the provincial government, the state government, to use our terms, did take more control over what the decisions are. You all will open. You all will be closed. You all will offer a hybrid fashion or model. And you will be sure that even when you're back in school, you have this type of virtual option, for example. And then the funding that goes along with it when they're directing the actions is very explicit as well. What makes that different for a superintendent is, even though you might find yourself, as I did when I was there, in a place of advocacy, if I agreed or didn't agree, or my board of trustees agreed or didn't agree, the one difference is we didn't have that authority. And they still don't have that authority. And so I found that sometimes, as I learned how to lead in our California context, there are times when I really appreciate the local control, the local autonomy, unless I don't have all the tools, I don't have the authority over the information, nor do I have the influence over the regulations. So then it's kind of like you've given local authority with our board, but I don't really have it. If that is something, if I'm making sense. And that's the part that is, I reach out to my colleagues who are on this and saying, can you help me? And John Nickerson will start laughing, because I'd say, can you help me understand how you do this? Because we're supposedly in charge, but we don't have all the tools. Answer your question as respectfully as I can. That's the big, I wouldn't have been driving some of the things in my district in Toronto that I'm expected with our board to drive here. But so I'll let the other panelists share their experiences. And I hope bringing a little bit of the Ontario, Toronto into this conversation has helped somewhat.
You know, well, back a number of years ago, everyone was taking trips to Toronto through the core district, and I guess maybe you've met some of the people from across the country. The place to go, like 10 years ago, was Toronto, and we had.
Well, one of the reasons I wanted to come to California is over the 10 years I was a superintendent there, I probably met 40 superintendents from California because they would come on study tours every single year, John, as you said. And I really appreciated all those connections that I made in the Toronto space with the California context.
Yeah.
This is Bruce. I just want to go back to a comment I made earlier in terms of lessons learned. I made a few general comments about government moving slowly and some comments about state leadership. And John, I just want to thank you, because what you just described is the crescendo of what we encountered this year. And you captured it brilliantly, because that is the point of our challenge or challenges we faced this year. So I just wanted to extend my appreciation for communicating that. Thank you.
Is there anything that the state could be, I mean, ideally, when you try and come up with plans for the use of this, is there anything, are you just turning to each other, or who do you turn to figure out whether what you're going to do will be an effective use of the money? And of course, from a parent standpoint, we have a plan that's due in June, but after that, there's no particular obligation to report back to the community to see how it's working or to see where you want to shift. Do you feel that responsibility to do that and update and go back and inform the community that, yeah, we tried this and it didn't quite work, so we're shifting now?
So yes, I would say that's a critical step for our process. We've been describing the plan as a construction of buckets that will identify ideas that we would like to walk forward, but we're also, acknowledging the fact that some of those ideas may or may not be fleshed out. And what the state plan requires is that we identify how we might spend those dollars, but it doesn't lock us into those. If they end up not being needed or not effective, we can pivot. But I think stakeholder engagement within that process is really, really important.
Well, I suppose one of the problems is to build up expectations too, because this is short-term money, as you said, and it's not going to solve your class reduction problem. And so there may be, particularly if everyone thinks that all of you are getting $5,000 per student, and you're not, but it is one-time money. And although I have heard that there are ways that you can, I'll write about it if it's so, you can extend that money as far as 2028, 29, I've been told. And that there are ways to do that, at least with the federal money, not the state money. Someone mentioned to me that actually it was a student we were talking about, a high school student who said, well, I like distance learning in some respects, and it would be great next year if we could go back, and I want to go back in the class, but maybe that's 1 day a week that we stay at home, we do study at home, we have small group meetings, we have tutorials, we have conversations with our teacher remotely, and you can't do that now. And I'm wondering, I don't think you can do that when you go back. I don't think the Ed Code would allow that situation the way it is. Maybe I'm wrong, but I'm just wondering if any of you think that there needs to be a change in Ed Code to allow you to have the flexibility and to try new things that you feel you can't do now.
So absolutely, there needs to be more flexibility in the Ed Code to allow us to be creative and to really follow the leadership of our teachers, who not just our students, but our teachers, who know what's best for kids and know what's best for themselves as well, in terms of training and having time to look at data and whatnot. So I do think that there's opportunities to think about scheduling differently, but you're absolutely correct that the Ed Code does not currently provide an opportunity for us to do that.
Anything in particular that you would like to see change, David?
Well, sure. A blended learning environment where students come in on different days for different things. There's a whole lot of ways that it could be done. There's for some students in particular, I'm thinking about a teacher back in Riverside who was teaching with our virtual school, but she also taught at the comprehensive high school. And she had an AP biology class, but she knew that not all the kids needed to be sitting with her every single day. So she asked if she could move that AP biology class to 0 period and do it remotely, but have kids come in based on needs. So if they came in for wet labs, they always came in for that. Kids that were struggling came in every day of the week, but kids that were making adequate progress and doing what they needed to do, they didn't need to get up and come into school for that class unless it was a lab day. So we could do that because it was an extra period, so it didn't contribute to the accounting of attendance. But we had to account for attendance, and if we didn't have to deal with that issue, we could be far more creative with how we engage students and teachers in the learning process.
That's interesting. Anyone else know about any changes in the Ed Code that might help make your job easier, or looking ahead?
I'll kind of echo what David's saying. Looking at this as we're thinking about options for next year and thinking about what any change in law might allow and might not allow, I would say that distance learning, as we've executed it this year, and I think all 4 of our districts did a superb job with the distance learning, relative to what I've seen elsewhere. But I don't think that's the model that we're looking for. It's something more creative, innovative. It's really a blend. We all think it's good for kids to be on campus interacting with their peers live, but could there be something to allow that flexibility so you could develop a program like David described, and particularly at different points in education? senior year versus ninth grade, it might be a little different in terms of what might be best for most kids. So I would love to see the flexibility in the ed code so that you could design and create with accountability different types of programs rather than the pure instructional minutes in a seat, or the accountability with independent study, things like that, but really get creative and rethink what education can be. It would be troubling to me if we just created law that allowed us to have 30% of the public education students in the state of California are continuing on a distance learning like we've seen it this year, because I don't necessarily think that's the right model.
And if I could just pick up where John is, when I arrived here last July and our meetings in my cabinet were filled with the conversation around instructional minutes, I learned something that was new to me. The amount of times we as senior people talk about instructional minutes and the amount of time that it actually influences our practice was a new learning. And as we've gone through this year, I want to pick up on the ideas that were shared around creativity. And I'm going to lean into a pretty challenging example. We weren't in hybrid long before we were able to move into the full-time instruction. And our educators, our teachers, our staff members, they did a great job as far as concerned in digital remote stuff. And they also did when we were in a hybrid for a short period of time. I think they did an amazing job. But something emerged pretty quickly from our students, from our staff, and from our parents, that the concept of asynchronous, not being with your teacher, perceived as unstructured and not accountable, as opposed to creative ways to invite kids into some really deep learning tasks. Maybe they worked collaboratively with their classmates, whether the teacher was there or not. There was this belief that it was less than. And we got into some challenges around that the only strategy was video conferencing. Well, video conferencing is something we're using in many of our cases, but not all. Some other districts chose to do that throughout. Video conferencing can be amazing, or depending upon the balance of who's in the school and who's not in the school, if it's not done properly, you can. Going with this is that we really, I think, could go down a creative road for some kids who really would have been really well served in asynchronous. They don't want independent, even though that's an amazing program too. And we have a program here in San Ramon that serves some kids, but they were looking for something else. And I almost we could have, and I know as I say this, some of my parent leaders who are here might disagree with me. I almost wish that we could have practiced a little longer to figure out what learned could be, because if the ed code would give us some flexibility, if we could start with some of the kids who really would be well served that way, and that we try a little bit more to see how we serve some of our students in a synchronous and an asynchronous space, not for everybody, but for some. That's a creativity that with how things are done with instructional minutes and attendance and such just gets a lot more complicated. So I offer that as a practical reality, and I'll state it. I mean, our hybrid model wasn't well loved, and it did cause us a lot of tension. And we didn't, as I said, do it long enough for us to gain any lessons on it.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting, John. And John Nickerson, I noticed that you are offering independent study, and you also have a virtual academy, I think, or at least you're looking into it. I'm not sure, but that's sort of two separate. That's sort of not quite what John has talked about. And then is there looking for some way? Perhaps you can take a second to explain the difference between the independent study and the virtual academy, and might there be a creative way to combine them for those students who would want that? And it may be, 10%, 20%, but I think there's a great deal of worry that among some districts that if you don't offer something, these parents may go to charters and they may go elsewhere.
So our virtual academy is not purely defined yet, but it is, what is defined is it's seen as a one-year program for not necessarily families who said distance learning kind of worked. We think we liked it. It's for the families where either the student has a health condition or somebody in the household has a health condition, and that puts them at unique risk. if a student is coming to campus. So we designed it as kind of a stopgap program, and it very well might be kind of blended in with the independent study, yet a purely remote option, an independent study. That's yet to be determined. But I think what we would love the flexibility to do is long-term kind of rethink education. And if the Ed Code allowed the flexibility to create kind of these blended learning opportunities that, you know, maybe students are in the school building for a good part of the day, but then doing some things independently or through remote support. So the Virtual Academy, we've kind of defined some basic parameters, 1 year for a particular audience, you know, as we work our way through the pandemic.
I see. And is that with the assumption that the state may either encourage or require that districts provide this as an alternative for those students who cannot return as opposed to don't want to return?
Yeah, it's the assumption that some of our families will need that. And
yeah,
but then in terms of whether the state requires it, that's kind of a different factor in what they'll require
okay.
as we look at this.
Yeah. And Bruce, can you relate to any of this at an elementary school level, or is this really a high school construct?
No, we're definitely can relate to it. We're already in discussions now as a consortium, if you will, within the Walla-Miranda school districts. We're also looking at the county for support in terms of possibly continuing some sort of virtual educational opportunity next school year. So those discussions are having, but I'm really glad you asked the question, because what you heard from the superintendents was a discussion that is very timely, might be a future topic to write about, and sort of taking a 10,000-foot look at all of this. And as a silver lining in terms of what we experienced the past year is a discussion about moving away from, or in addition to, the more traditional learning environment, more creative learning opportunities. That's what your question has sort of focused on, and that question is unique for this time. And my concern is that we lose this opportunity to take advantage of what everybody just described in more creative opportunities relative to different kinds of learning programs. Someone earlier talked about more personalized instruction. Here's the opportunity. Had this not happened, we may not be having this discussion. And I do hope our state leadership through different organizations look at the same question and don't lose momentum that's been generated in terms of some great ideas that have come from successful programming the past year, where superintendents and school boards might continue those in some capacity in the near future while still offering a more traditional program.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'm not sure where that discussion starts. I don't hear it in Sacramento now. It's more along the lines of, you know, tuition and ADA and questions like that. And I don't know whether it would be more of a foundation supported that then you go seek an exemption from the State Board of Education, but it's certainly worth looking at the options, because I think people are at this moment in time thinking there must be or can be ways of doing things differently.
And John, if I could just jump in,
Yeah.
because there's a really significant question in the chat that just popped up around, can we eliminate asynchronous learning because students consider it a day off? That, I think, is the transformative conversation we need to have. So let me be practical. If an asynchronous day is just the teacher assigned homework that the kid does at home the next day, then that's not what I'm saying.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is that even that in an asynchronous schedule, and when we think about our older kids getting ready for life after us, I mean, I've said this publicly a number of times, especially for our 11th and 12th graders. Lots of college is asynchronous, where the kids are expected to do a ton of work, and the work is really meaningful, and it takes numerous days, and it kind of then allows the teacher to engage at different times and spaces. So in other words, The learning task is complex. The learning task is extended. There's oftentimes need for collaboration so that you get that whole student voice and engagement thing going on. There's accountability along the way. There's feedback along the way, and it's pretty tough. And so that's very different than what some people thought asynchronous means. And truthfully, we didn't have enough time to support our staff. It's not their fault. I don't think we actually even got into it to the way that you're hearing me speak now, because we just didn't have the time or the energy or the brain space. So I wouldn't want this pandemic year where we tried some asynchronous to mean we can't go back and try it again. So that's number one. And number two, I'm not saying it's for everybody. The pandemic made it kind of be everybody's concern. I'd like to try it with those who really hear what I'm saying and the others are saying and want it. See, that's a whole different story. It's not you have to do it. It's just that when people hear it described, just like independent study, some people push there, and we are going to continue to offer it, and we want to offer it. I would just like to see this being done for those who want it, and then over time we might be able to perfect it and make it even that much more meaningful for others to consider. So I wanted to respond because I saw that in the chat.
You know, actually, John, I'm not seeing that. Are there questions? We have time for questions, and I'm not seeing that answers. Am I missing some questions that we can ask here?
That was the only one that popped up that I can see. So
Okay, I haven't gotten many. There is time, still a couple minutes for folks who want to ask questions. There are a couple, and there's a long question. Let me see if I can boil this down. How can districts, I think it goes back to what we've talked a little bit about. How can districts increase engagement and resources allocation for those groups who are not currently and are not likely to participate or speak up? Yeah, any thoughts on that? I guess it's how you engage your students, what you figure out, particularly I was a parent in distance learning where it was often difficult to know exactly where students were. Okay.
I'll just share.
Yeah, go ahead, John.
John, one thing that we learned very early in the pandemic, and I want to say in March of last year, is we weren't communicating with our students enough. And we were communicating with our parents a whole lot, but not with our students enough. And so that's one of the early lessons learned, and we'll try to continue that, reaching out to the students directly and getting their opinion on things, because one thing we also discovered is the students' opinions often differed wildly from their parent opinions. And it's not that both don't have a value in informing a district as it moves forward, but certainly listening to the kids helps us try to address all needs.
Can you give an example, John, where you got a really good insight from
Well, let's look at kind of what Dr. Malloy was talking about with the asynchronous and synchronous, and the value in the asynchronous learning. We were hearing from parents that it was it was a day off for everybody, including our teachers, which was not true. But it was, what we were hearing from the kids was not so much that there was value in it. It was just a different type of learning. So that's just one simple example that we learned through surveys back in the fall.
Yeah.
And if I could just, John,
sure,
briefly comment on, I think the importance of our equity work is that we're creating the conditions for all voices to influence, and that we accept the fact maybe some of our voices, whether they're staff voices, parent voices, student voices, don't always know how to do that. And it's our job to create the conditions for that. And so one of the things that I ask at every meeting, and when our cabinet team is meeting, it's the basis of the discussion. And when we're working with our principals, we ask the feedback, which is, who aren't we hearing from? And how might you gain insight from them? Because we do want to hear from everybody. And I'm grateful for those who know how to navigate whichever systems, town hall, emails, other means to ensure their voice is being heard and that their influence is being offered. But I think it's our job as leaders to create the conditions and to reach out where we may not be hearing that different perspective, and then providing some assistance so that that voice, that perspective also is communicated and is influencing our decision making.
Thank you. Interesting. David, in knowing your interest in technology, I mean, what practices have you seen either that your teachers have learned or that you've seen that you can incorporate that in the classroom moving ahead?
So really the integration of technology into the curriculum,
Yeah.
training that was done over the summer has really helped teachers kind of leap ahead from where they were last school year. And so there's a lot of blended learning mechanisms that they've been engaging. We've seen some, although I do not want to continue concurrent learning, we've seen some incredible examples of teachers who'd figured out how to communicate at the same time with people who are in the room and who are at home. And again, I don't want to keep doing that, but we learned that those teachers were able to figure out how to make that happen. And that may have some play in how we deal with students that have to go on home hospital as an example. And so we're trying to learn small things like that. We've talked a little bit already today about the larger concept of blended learning as it applies to asynchronous time. But I think we've gotten more people comfortable, more teachers comfortable, and frankly, more parents and students comfortable with the idea that I don't have to be sitting in a classroom to continue learning, which starts to beg the question of how could we use time during the school day to support internships for our older high school students or other real world work opportunities or learning opportunities that take a student's backside out of a chair when the state only gives us funding for when the backside is in the chair. So that we have to make this choice between full-time seat-based instruction or independent study. And a lot of people don't really get that independent study paper-based is the same thing if you have a virtual school. It's an onerous record-keeping possibility. And so I think as we move more stakeholders, including our teachers and our parents, into a level of understanding about the value of those types of opportunities, it's going to help us move our legislators.
Do you think this might be able to expand dual enrollment with community colleges?
Oh, yeah.
That presents an opportunity.
Absolutely. We do that already. And I think everybody else probably does that has high schools. But it's when you start to be able to kind of crack that connection between the amount of time a person's in a seat and how the person is demonstrating mastery or competency of their learning skills, it starts to enable you not just to break that seat-based attendance issue, but also does it take 185 days or 180 days for a student to learn algebra? And I would posit that it doesn't. It takes some 150 and some 215, but it's never everybody doing it at the same time, and yet that's how our system is structured. So if we could break the links between the Carnegie unit, UC's entrance requirements and whatnot, and the ed code related to how we track attendance and are funded, there's no stopping the creativity that could come out of the public school system, which, by the way, and I don't want to take us down a rabbit hole again, but guess who can do those kind of things? Charter schools get the opportunity to do those things, and public comprehensive schools do not.
Yeah.
So at the very least, legislators, give us the flexibility that you already give to charter schools.
Yeah, you mentioned this is a topic for another day, but that the framework for math is being proposed, and one of the things is that they're discouraging offering Algebra 1 before 9th grade, which you go way back to the math, which is the exact opposite. But it struck me as the irony of it that now you're in a position to do competency-based learning, and now we're prescribing something for all districts to do. Is what gets to your point.
Yep.
I see Nasser's here in the 2-minute warning. If any of you have anything, final thoughts that we didn't talk about, and apologies if I didn't raise them. Well, I've enjoyed very much talking this conversation, and I hope others listening did as well.